Hello, it's Alex, the Booktubers. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my favourite books of 2022. I read 96 books in total during the year, and out of those I had 5 5-star reads and 4 4.5-star reads. So those 9 books are the ones that are making up my favourites of the year. In addition to that, I had an absolute ton, like over half of the books I read during the year I gave 4 stars to, so I really did have an excellent year of reading, and I was tempted to do an honourable mentions, picking out some of my favourite 4-star reads, but it was just too hard to pick out of them all because I really did read so many great books this year. So instead, yeah, I figured I'd just keep it to the obvious choices of the 4.5 and 5-star ratings. And just for funsies, I thought I would also include my least favourite book of the year, which is not something I normally do, but yeah, since there were 9 in my top books, I figured let's round it to an even number of 10 and include my least favourite. And let's start off with that one just to get it out of the way with, and then we can focus on the good stuff. But my least favourite book of the year, which I gave 1 star to, was The Girlfriend by R.L. Stine. And you know I love point horror. They're one of my favourite things to read. They're super nostalgic for me, and I pick them up pretty regularly, and I just have a really good time with them. Most of the time, anyway. The Girlfriend was the exception. It is definitely the worst point horror book I've read thus far. So to try and keep this one brief, basically this is about a guy who has a long-term girlfriend. She goes away on holiday and he immediately sleeps with someone else. This new girl wants to have a relationship with him, but he's like, nah, I've got a girlfriend, this didn't happen. He is not faced with any kind of responsibility for his actions, and he faces no kind of repercussions for the things that he does during the story. It just wasn't a good look, the kind of attitude of the book, basically. And, you know, I read a lot of vintage horror, so there's a lot of outdated and potentially problematic stuff that I read, but a lot of the time I can still read it for what it is and enjoy it. Whereas this one was just a hard no from me. I just didn't like it at all. Even that kind of stuff aside, it was just a really boring and repetitive story. The majority of the book consisted of this new girl insisting that he's her baby now, and him saying, no, I'm not. Just on repeat, basically. So I didn't think this was a good one for a few different reasons, and I gave it 1 star. So yeah, this was my least favourite book of the entire year. Okay, so moving on to my favourites of the year, let's focus on the good stuff. Yeah, like I said, I had 4 4.5-star reads, so I'll start off with those. And in no particular order, this one is Haunted by James Herbert. This is about a skeptical paranormal investigator, David Ash, who is tasked with visiting this old mansion and the family that live there, who say that they've been experiencing some strange goings on. He visits the house and stays there for a period in order to investigate and find out if it is indeed something supernatural or not. And yeah, I just really loved the atmosphere, the tone, and just the general vibe of this one. It's set in the, you know, gloomy British countryside, and yeah, this family that live in this old mansion, yeah, definitely have some quirks, and he's, yeah, just trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And yeah, he starts to experience some strange phenomena while he's there. Yeah, I just thought this was really well written. It had me hooked in. It's not a very long read either. And like I say, I just, yeah, really enjoyed the atmosphere that this one gave me. Next up is This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. This was very kindly sent to me by my friend Briar, so thank you so much for sending this my way. Yeah, it became one of my favourite reads of the year. And this is about a character, Tiago, who is dealing with the death of his wife, and we then have a mixture of grief horror and some supernatural horror, technology horror, and yeah, some other weird things that come in as the story goes on. One of the elements of this story is that while Tiago's wife was still alive, they had a smart speaker in their home which started acting very strangely, and it would like order random things for them. So we do have some back and forth in the time periods of Thiago and his wife's life and the things that they were dealing with, and then yeah, what happened to her and now how he is dealing with life after her death, and yeah, the paths that his life now goes down in processing the grief of losing her. This one isn't a long read either, but it has a lot packed into it. I really enjoyed the writing style, the characters, and yeah, the different elements of the story just made for a really unique reading experience, and one that, yeah, again, it just had like a tone to it that really stuck with me. Next is The Necrophiliac by Gabrielle Whitcop, and the edition I read was translated from the original French by Don Babst. This is a pretty short one, I think probably the shortest of all of them, but it's one that had such a strong voice that, yeah, it was definitely going to be one of my favourites of the year. So this is, as the title might suggest, about a necrophiliac, so this isn't one that's going to be for everyone, but it is absolutely beautifully written. It's told from the perspective of the person who likes dead people, and yeah, the things that this character does to be able to do the things that he wants to do with dead people. So yeah, it's that interesting mix of awful and grotesque and disturbing content, but portrayed with this beautiful writing style and yeah, a very strong voice. This is another one that just had a really strong tone, a very strong style, and yeah, definitely had an impact on me and made for a unique reading experience. And then last up for the 4.5-star reads is Toady by Mark Morris. So this one, going to the other end of the spectrum, is quite a large book. I think this one was over 700 pages, but absolutely worth it. It's set in a British seaside town, and it's a coming-of-age story following a group of teenage boys and something that enters their life through something that they do, without going into specifics. And yeah, this thing continues to haunt them. So the very basic of it might sound a little bit like It by Stephen King, but this is really its own unique thing, completely separate from It. This one, again, absolutely excellent writing. Loved the characters, loved the storytelling. It is an epic story because it's so long, but yeah, it didn't feel like a long story while you were reading it. It just felt like a really great one to, yeah, sink your teeth into and spend a good chunk of time with. It has incredibly strong like details and descriptions and a lot of really unique and weird and awful visuals, some of which were just, yeah, jaw-droppingly good. And yeah, I just had such a good time with this. And this is one that I buddy read with the wonderful Kelsey over at Slime and Slashers. We both loved it and had such a good time reading it. So if you like coming of age horror, then I definitely recommend this one. Okay, and now moving on to my 5-star reads of the year. Again, in no particular order, we have Marabou Stalk Nightmares by Irvine Welsh. This was actually a reread for me, but I read it quite some years ago, definitely way before my booktube days, so I figured I would include it. This is about a character who is in hospital and he is kind of remembering different things that happened to him from his childhood and throughout his life. A lot of them pretty awful things that have happened to him or that he has done throughout his life. And there's also some hallucinatory episodes mixed in with this while he's in hospital and, yeah, going through some stuff and processing his trauma. Yeah, this one definitely gets pretty grim at times with the content and disturbing, but yeah, I absolutely love the writing style here. It's definitely one that had an impact on me when I first read it many years ago, and I was curious to see how I felt about it second time round. But yeah, this one definitely held up and still really stood out to me as an excellent read, so I'm really glad I revisited it. I feel like this is one of this author's books that doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, compared to his other works like Trainspotting. So if you like Irvine Welsh and you haven't read this one, then I would definitely recommend it. Next is Season of the Witch by Charlie Jacob. If you saw my favourites of last year, you will know that her novel This Symbiotic Fascination was my very favourite book of last year, and I was very much looking forward to reading some more of her work. And the one that I did manage to pick up this past year was Season of the Witch. This is a difficult one to try and explain, but yeah, I guess one thing to mention off the bat is that it does have some extreme content. It is graphic, it's disturbing, it's messed up. So yeah, if that isn't your kind of thing, then I'd maybe skip this one. If you like that kind of thing, but also prefer your writing to have a bit more depth and substance to it than it just being schlocky, then yeah, Charlie Jacob is the author for you, because she does it all. And yeah, this one was just as good as This Symbiotic Fascination for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So a couple of the elements here, we have a book called The Necromania Sexualis, which is something of an urban myth, supposedly written by a serial killer, but maybe it's not a myth after all, maybe it actually exists. And then there's also this kind of late night sex hotline that is being advertised around town, where people are encouraged to phone up and talk about their deepest, darkest desires. And yeah, these two things are happening at the same time. And like the title suggests, we also have some witchy goodness involved as well. So yeah, this made for a really unique read, amazingly written. I really love her writing style, and yeah, was just pretty bonkers as well. So yeah, it was awesome. I gave it 5 stars. Next up, something a little different, more of a classic. This is Flowers in the Attic by Virginia, or V.C. Andrews. This is one that I'd been meaning to pick up for a really long time and finally did so. I had read one of her other books, My Sweet Audrina, which I thought was good, but this one I thought was great. And yeah, I don't know if I need to go into too much detail on the plot since it's a very well-known one, but this one surprised me because I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did, and it really hooked me in right from the beginning. It was definitely more disturbing and more emotional than I thought it would be, and I think one of my issues with My Sweet Audrina, even though that had a lot of craziness and things I enjoyed, I did think it just got a bit boring at times. Whereas this one, I was never bored. It just always kept me involved in the story, and just needing to know what on earth was going to happen next in this awful tale and the horrendous things that these kids end up going through. So yeah, I know this one generally gets mixed responses from people, but for me, I loved it. So yeah, definitely one of my favourites of the year. Next up is Peel Back and See by Mike Thorne. This is a short story collection, and it's pretty rare for a short story collection to be so consistently amazing as this one is. I feel like usually short story collections and anthologies are more of a mixed bag, but this one was just so good. The writing, the storytelling, the ideas and the imagination within this collection were just absolutely fantastic. There is also a good mixture of types of story in here. Most of them are dark and serious in tone. Some of them are more emotional, some of them are more disturbing and sinister, and then there's also a couple of more fun ones in here just to kind of balance it out. And there were a few stories that stood out to me as favourites of the collection, but I do think the collection as a whole was well worthy of a 5-star rating, And if you have not read this one and you want to check out Mike Thorne's work, this is, yeah, the perfect place to do so. And last up, one of my favourite books of the year was Battle Royale by Koshun Takami. This edition was translated from the original Japanese by Yuji Oniki. And yeah, this is another one that I had been meaning to pick up for ages. And it is quite a chunky one, so that's one of the reasons I've been putting it off. But I'm so glad I picked this one up this year because it was just an absolutely brilliant read. I thought this one was going to be much more pulpy than it actually was. The premise of, yeah, a bunch of students being put on an island and having to kill or be killed until there's only one survivor. Yeah, definitely a pretty pulpy premise, but this one just had a lot more heart to it, a lot more emotion. Like, it made me cry more than once, and it just had me so invested in the stories of these students and, yeah, the friendships and stuff that happens along the way. It's very tense as well because we don't know, you know, people's motives necessarily throughout the story. You know, are they just being nice in order to then kill someone, or are they really trying to, yeah, team up and get through this together somehow? Yeah, it's a wild ride. There's a lot of violence, a lot of people get killed, but yeah, there's a lot more to the story than that as well. There's social commentary, and there's also just, yeah, some of the details and descriptions in here were just really wonderful and really stood out to me. So yeah, in a sense, this one was a bit of a surprising read to me as well, because I thought I was going to enjoy it, but I ended up like absolutely loving it. So if, like me, you had been putting this off because of the length of it, yeah, don't let that deter you. I found this to be a quick read considering how long it is, because I was just, yeah, so hooked into the story that I just needed to know what was going to happen. So those were my favourites of 2022, plus one least favourite. Do let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to hear your thoughts. Or please feel free to tell me about your favourites of the year. If you have any recommendations, or things you think that I should read, then I would love to hear about them. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!